What do you think of Solaris?
Oh, it's great. Masterpiece.
Yes, yes, it is. The interesting thing about this film is I saw it once and I loved it, but I didn't understand it.
Right.
And rewatching it now made me realize how little I understood it. But when you're looking at something that's a masterpiece, like you said, or that's art,
Yeah.
you know it's great, even if you can't fully identify why it's great. You just know it, that you're
Yeah.
watching something extraordinary. It's an extraordinary film. It's
Yeah.
a 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, whatever you want to, whatever rating scale, two thumbs up you want to go by. It's a great, great film.
Yes, it
With that
is.
said, it's also a tough watch.
Yes. It's long.
It is long. It's long and it's dense. It reminded me of when I read The Prince by Machiavelli. So that's actually a very short book. But why it reminded me of that is that it was so dense. I'm like, why is this book that's so small and so short taking me so long to read? Because I would get a headache every couple paragraphs because what I was reading was so dense. The information they were trying to pass on to me was just so thick. And I
Mhm.
feel that way in certain parts of this film, in the philosophy that Tarkovsky is saying through his characters. They really make you think, and it really makes you contemplate, okay, how do I recontextualize what I just watched? What does this mean with the characters? What does this mean with the movie? Like, how do I take these things? And one of the critiques of this film, and one of my critiques when I first saw it, is that beginning is so long. Cut out the first 45 minutes. Let's just get to the space station. But on this watching of it, I fully realize if you take out that first 45 minutes, if you take even a minute out of this movie, it hurts the rest of the movie because you need all of that buildup for those moments that you see later on to have meaning. How do you know
Mhm.
he misses Earth? Like, how do you know Solaris looks cold? Unless
Mhm.
you see the beauty and the greenery of Earth before you go to this cold, desolate, disheveled space station. Like you need that contrast, you need that time spent with him being human and being
Yeah.
flawed before you get into this deep philosophy that happens early on in the film. So, as slow paced and as long as the movie is, and any critiques that I had coming into this, or that the critiques that are online, or that people may have when they see the runtime or they hear about this film, I think they are misguided critiques. And I think this movie needs everything you see on screen to make it as special as it is. You cut out the first 45 minutes, this movie isn't as good.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you kind of need that. In a way, it's setting up everything that you need to know in the first 45 minutes. But you don't know it at the time. You don't know it's setting all these things up that are going to be important later. So yeah, it's definitely necessary. Interestingly, I think that the book only starts with him arriving on the space station. So that was more Tarkovsky's addition to the story. The original novel, I think, just starts with him getting to the space station. So it's an
I think
interesting
it was
difference.
a Polish author,
Hmm.
Stanislaw Lem. He did not like the interpretation of the book. And this happens. Sometimes there's an interpretation and the author loves it, supports it, and sometimes he hates it. We talked about a film on this show, The Shining, where you had a great author in Stephen King and a great filmmaker in Stanley Kubrick, and they just completely clashed in the interpretation. And this Lem seems to be a really good author. I mean, from
Hmm.
all indications, the book is great, and Tarkovsky obviously is a great filmmaker, and you have a similar clash where you have two incredibly talented people in two different forms of media, and they clash on the interpretation of a great story that's told brilliantly in two different ways.
Yeah, it sounds like they were kind of almost working together, or at least keeping in contact as the screenplay was being written, and Lem was being consulted about it. But then when he saw the finished, I think the first draft of the screenplay, three-quarters of it took place on Earth, which he was extremely unhappy about. So obviously they didn't quite keep that, but yeah, it's interesting that he had kind of been involved in it, he'd been consulted, but Tarkovsky definitely had ideas that he wanted to explore, and that involved showing life on Earth.
Yeah, I believe Lem called it, he said, "This isn't my book, this is Crime and Punishment." So I think he
Yeah,
wasn't as he did. I think he didn't want the focus to be too much on the characters and the guilt of this, the suicide, and I think he wanted more to be focused on Solaris, the ocean, the planet, and like you said, the space station. Uh,
yeah.
the
I don't.
ocean isn't really that big a part of the story. I mean, it is there, but it's definitely more in the backdrop. It's not like, what you would think of. Maybe the ocean is maybe the antagonist. It's like a nature horror, like some kind of, we have to fight this entity. It's not really a character that much in the film at all.
No, it's kind of the great unknown, and I think it's kind of in a way we don't know. Is it the antagonist, or is it just being what it is? Is it just trying to communicate? And I think that's something that Lem was interested in, was the idea of human beings trying to communicate with alien life forms. Like, how is that even possible? Because the alien life form may not even resemble what we think of as a person. It might be an ocean, it's a body of water. Like, how do you communicate with that? It's like a very different thing. So I think he was obsessed with that kind of idea, the failure of communication between human beings and other alien races. So it's definitely here, but I think Tarkovsky brought a bunch of other things to it as well.
Yeah, I think that's why he made it an ocean as well, because he didn't want it to have any human characteristics.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think this story would have been interesting if you focused on it, because it's an interesting concept, which I guess why it's a great book. But I also think that the movie is great itself. So I don't
Yes.
see any fault in either direction.
No, no, I don't either.
Yeah. Another thing interesting about this happened during the space race, which I believe was the mid 50s to the mid 70s. And Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, I think, came out before man landed on the moon. Definitely shot before. And this came out a few years later, and you hear different versions of this. I haven't found a definitive version online, as this is the Soviet Union's response, and it is as like the US versus the Soviet Union slash space race slash movie race with science fiction. Or you also hear versions where this is Tarkovsky's response to Kubrick's different version of similar type things going on. So whose response, who's responding to who has beef with who knows? I don't know. But it does seem like there is, if not a full-on competition with these movies, there is definitely a full-on comparison with these movies, and they are extremely different in execution. You have Kubrick, again, with you know, 2001, my favorite film ever. Part of the reason why we are doing this type of format and doing movies like this is because I think I mentioned to you, maybe off pod, that I love 2001 so much, but I almost never watch it. And like, I really want to focus on watching great films. So it's been a while since I've seen 2001. And my enjoyment of one film doesn't hurt my enjoyment of the other. I don't see competition. I think they're both great films. But I love 2001. It's my favorite film. And that transition of the cavemen, I think it was, throwing the animal bone that they found out was through evolution found out they could use it as a weapon, throwing it up into the air and it transitions into that space station symbolizes everything that 2001 is about. It's about technology, evolution, the tools of man. It's not about people. As much as I love that film, I couldn't tell you anything about those characters. HAL 9000 is the most developed character in there, and it's a voice from a machine. So this is the antithesis of 2001 by execution. But again, they're both great films. But I can see how someone with the values of Tarkovsky would say this is just cold and,
yeah, he wasn't a fan.
Unlike anything he was not a fan. He was not a fan. But ironically, Kubrick was a fan of this film, though.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, I think Tarkovsky wanted to bring more emotional depth to his films and not really focus on the technology and stuff like that. How does this thing work, or how does the machine work? He wasn't so interested in that. He wanted the more human drama, I guess, the human emotion. And I think that he definitely succeeded in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. He wrote a book called Sculpting in Time, which I skimmed a little bit before we did this. And it seems like his philosophy on filmmaking and how he views films is not so much with a plot structure as it is time structure. And it's about picking out certain points in time and condensing them and playing with them, and then you have a cohesive story from there. It wasn't about the narrative structure that we're all used to, and you can tell that with this movie. There's no real okay, we got to get this and do that, or time's gonna run out, and, I got to get to this station before this alien does this or that. The main character goes up on the station and it suddenly becomes this relationship drama almost, crime and punishment in space, but there's no real plot or structure as far as that goes. But after skimming the book, I'm glad I did that before I rewatched it, because it made me appreciate the film more. Because you see that it's just him showing you moments in time. And when you see these moments, when he has the big moments as the film develops, they have more meaning, because you know why this means so much to this character. You know why when a character reacts highly emotionally, you can more connect with them because you've been through their journey. You know why that means something to them. It's not about showing you anything that spectacular on screen, because we don't see anything major happen. There's nothing major that's going on. But we emotionally connect with the character because we follow their life journey as opposed to just following a plot storyline.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say too that when I first started watching the movie, I thought, well, it's beautifully shot. It looks beautiful, and that's the first thing that I kind of noticed. And it's not often that I actually stop to notice that, but it really is beautifully shot. It looks beautiful, and I found it interesting. Like, it was an interesting situation, and I'm talking about the first 45 minutes here on Earth, where it was interesting. And I thought to myself, well, is it ever going to be more than that? I don't know. It is at least interesting, and it's beautiful to look at. But as we got deeper in, and as he gets to the spaceship, and as we do wind up in that sort of, whatever you want to call it, the relationship drama, it just got more and more interesting to me. It got more gripping. It was kind of creepy and disturbing at times. It was suspenseful. I just found I was more and more wrapped up in it, and it really worked for me. I liked it more and more as it went along.
Absolutely. And the little moments, again, they feel little if you don't have the build up to them and the proper journey to follow. And I definitely appreciate this film a lot more having researched it before I watched it. And I think it would be a difficult watch if you don't know the filmmaker and what he's trying to accomplish. It's almost like going to an art museum. You can't just look at the painting or the sculpture. You have to read that little tidbit next to it to get some context. Without context, it's hard to appreciate this. You know, if you just get bored or doze off during some of the slow parts, waiting for something exciting to happen, and it doesn't happen, you're gonna say, "What the hell am I watching?" You know. So yeah, I think context helps, and I think if you understand his philosophy on filmmaking and the fact that you're just capturing certain moments in time, and these moments are what makes these people who they are, what develops them, what makes them the character you're seeing on screen. When we see him, he's a tortured character, but
Yes.
through the snippets we kind of see why he's tortured, and why he is the way he is. And I yeah, I greatly appreciate this film, and I love the fact that we decided to go with it. It's a great all-time classic. It was also has another version as well, the
Yes.
Steven Soderbergh version. I think 2002.
I think
So
so.
even that's an old version at this point. It's hard to say.
True. Yes.
But I've seen that version. I haven't seen it in a very long time, and I saw it once, and I didn't like it. But honestly, the more I thought about it, not even just recently, but maybe a year or two after I watched it, it kind of popped into my head again. I was like, you know what? This isn't a terrible movie. I only think it's bad because I'm comparing it to this version of Solaris. But from all indications, it's a lot closer to the book. And it does chew out the fat of the first 45 minutes of this version. So it's a much tighter version. I think it's around 90 minutes. But it shows you that you really need those 45 minutes if you watch that Clooney and Soderbergh version, because it does fall short in depth. It's a very cookie cutter, you know, plot oriented, story oriented, as opposed to character, time structured film that Tarkovsky made. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't, but I read a bit about it, and that was my impression that it was an attempt to be closer to the book. So it would lose all that stuff, like the beginning, the 45 minutes, because, yeah, I don't think that's in the book. And yeah, I guess I should see it at some point because it would probably be interesting, at least to compare it. But yeah, it's hard to imagine that it would be anywhere near as good as this version.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like a lot of the American versions of longer, more artistic auteur foreign films. Old Boy was remade by Spike
Mhm.
Lee. Um, you have a lot of the Japanese horror films that were remade. So, I mean, there's a long history of, an Americanized version that chews out the fat. Seven Samurai was turned into a Western, The Magnificent Seven. So, it's just a
Yes.
matter of like, all right, what are the critiques people are making about these movies? Let's make those changes, put in a few big stars, and put in plot structure that most people are used to, and see if we can make a buck. It didn't end up
Yeah.
making any money, but
No.
it wasn't a terrible film, and if you like it, you shouldn't feel ashamed to like it. It was a decent film. It just wasn't this epic classic that this version of Solaris is. But yeah, definitely highly recommended. Great film. You can interpret this in a lot of different ways, and I think that's part of what Tarkovsky aims for with his films. In that, because he's doing a time structure and there's not a plot, there is no right answer. This isn't a quiz where there's a right answer. I think this was a quote from him that if 700 people read one book, there are 700 different versions of that book then, because you all interpret it in a different way. And I think that's what he aims for with this film, because if you look at this film, and I saw some video essays on it as well, because I was like, let me just try to see what's the consensus of this film. And I saw some great essays, but a lot of them go in a lot of different directions. And it's because of the way he structures his film. You can look at this as a Pinocchio story of this woman who isn't real, that wants to be real, wants to be looked at as human. And this film questions humanity. You can look at it from that standpoint. You can look at it from like a Little Mermaid standpoint, where she's coming out of the ocean for her love, to acknowledge her, and and finding love. And um, there are a lot of different ways you can interpret this film, a lot of different directions you can take it in. Was he always on Solaris? Is he one of the manifestations from Solaris? Was he, is he on Solaris at the end? How long was he on Solaris towards the end? There's a lot of different directions you can take this stuff in, and there is no definitive right way because, again, of the way he structures it, in that there is no right or wrong answer. Another great Russian Soviet filmmaker, um, Sergei Einstein,
Eisenstein.
Eisenstein, Eisenstein. Yeah,
Eisenstein.
yeah, he's another filmmaker I definitely want to get into. I've seen some of his films, Battleship Potemkin and Ivan the Terrible Part 1, I think I saw. Part 2, maybe, I'm not sure. But I saw a couple of his films. But he is the father, grandfather, the inventor or pioneer of montages and montage filmmaking. And it's funny that you have these two filmmakers from the same region that have such different philosophies, because when you talk about montages, you're telling people what to think through a series of images, and that's almost the exact opposite approach that he takes. And I find that contrast to be interesting, and it'll be interesting to maybe do one of his films and then contrast it with one of Tarkovsky's film, but they almost have the almost exact opposite approach. Through a series of images and cuts and editing, I'm going to tell the story, as opposed to long takes that travels through time instead of plot and structure.
Yeah. One of the things that I was not really, I didn't do a lot of preparation before watching the movie for the first time, and I was struck by. I felt I could see a lot of influence that this movie had had on other movies, and I could also see maybe influences that this movie had taken from other movies, or maybe the book had taken from other movies or other books. But I actually thought of 2001 as a movie that had some similarities in that you've got a big computer that's kind of controlling things and kind of messing with the humans, and here we've got the ocean that's kind of controlling people and messing with them. Like, there's a certain similarity there. But I thought of movies like Event Horizon. I don't know if you saw Event Horizon, and it feels like that one was definitely influenced by this. Even movies like Blade Runner, because you get into that kind of idea of what is a human being, and if we create a human being in some way, like in Blade Runner, they create these replicants, they artificially create them, and then they kind of feel like they're human, and they don't know that they're not human, and they want to live, and I feel there's something similar going on in this movie, where it's maybe the ocean is creating people, pulling them out of people's minds and sort of fabricating these really close facsimiles of people, and they don't even know necessarily, or they think they remember things, and at what point do we say, well, this person is human, even though they were created by some other means. Where do you draw that line? Is this person human? Is this person not human? I find it all very interesting. I don't know. What did you think about that?
Well, that's what I said with the whole Pinocchio type thing. It was like there's
True.
different ways you can interpret it. Yeah, it's interesting in that after she was created for a certain amount of time, she did gain her own agency. And it's, again, you can, like I said, you can look at Little Mermaid, you can look at it as Pinocchio, you can look at it as a child, where when a child is born, you're everything to them. You move away from them, they start crying, they throw tantrums, they need that dependence. And eventually they grow and learn to develop on their own. And that's kind of what happened with her, in that she eventually got her own agency, and she became, she wasn't his wife anymore. She was a completely other person. She
Yeah.
didn't need to be around him when they had that philosophical meeting where all the characters are in that room. Initially, when he first left her, she broke through the door because she
Yes.
couldn't stand being alone away from him. Then he
Yes.
realized, oh my God, I left her alone, and he ran back there, sweating and running, and she's just in her
Mhm.
own thoughts, nothing to do with him, even though she was born from his thoughts. So,
Yes.
yeah, I definitely think this movie explored those elements as well.
After we see the credits on black, we see a title, Solaris, Part 1. And we open with a shot of a clear, shallow water. And there's plant life in the water, seemingly almost waving at us from the bottom of the water. And we see a leaf float by on the surface. We see plants sticking up out of the water. And as our gaze kind of moves to the edge of the pond or the lake or whatever it is, we see a man standing nearby. And at first, it's only his legs and arms hanging down at his side, but then our gaze moves up his body until his face is revealed. And he's looking pensive, almost unhappy, as his eyes move around, taking in the sights around him. And then he looks down at the water, where the plant life continues to wave from below. And we see him more from a distance, and he's surrounded by a whole bunch of plant life. And he seems almost mesmerized by it all at first, but then he turns and he walks away through the thick green foliage. And we see wider shots of the landscape, and it's beautiful. Big trees, bushes, fallen leaves scattered on the ground. He continues to walk through the scenery, and then he arrives at the edge of another body of water. And the camera moves up to reveal a house on the other side of the water as the man continues to walk off screen. And he seems to be making his way toward the house, but he stops and he puts his hands in the water and he washes them. And then he hears a car approaching, and he looks up to see two men get out on a distant bridge, and they seem to be looking at him, and one calls out, "Chris, come here." And up on the bridge, the one man explains to the other that Chris takes walks every morning for at least an hour. And he's been working too hard, sometimes all night, because of solaristics, which we come to realize is the study of Solaris. Then the two men talk about a lot is depending on Chris's initial communique. The crew on the spaceship have been sending messages that are incomprehensible. And if Chris says that their work cannot continue, the space station can be withdrawn from Solaris's orbit. And the younger man of the two wants Chris to watch some film. And they note that Chris will be leaving tomorrow for Solaris. It starts raining suddenly, even though the sun is shining. And Chris stands in it, then he sits down, seemingly unbothered by getting wet. Perhaps he knows that this is his last chance to experience such things. The younger man screens the film for Chris, and it's an old black and white film of scientists and experts discussing the expedition to Solaris and a particular flying mission over the ocean of Solaris. And when they didn't come back, a search party was sent out, but the fog was so dense that they had to call off the search. But one helicopter didn't return with the rest of the search party, and it was piloted by Henry Burton, who we come to realize is the younger man, who's now much older, who is showing Chris this film. And Burton shows up 1 hour after nightfall, after he disappeared on this mission, and he's in a state of shock, and he refuses to leave the ship again or even go near the window that looks down at the ocean. He says he has an important message for everyone that will affect the future of solaristics. So they let him tell his story. And basically, he saw the ocean changing. It was forming figures in front of him, creating a landscape of trees and other things. But they weren't quite real. They looked kind of plastic. Uh, and he says that he took film of this, so he's going to show them the film. But unfortunately, when they screen the film, it only shows the ocean and clouds, maybe fog, and Burton can't understand why this is the case. He also tells them that he saw an infant floating on the surface, and it was 4 meters tall. Well, the experts dismiss Burton's visions as hallucinations. They also say that they can't base any decisions on the future of solaristics on the testimony of a non-expert. They also note that they've been studying Solaris for years and they're getting nowhere. Some say press on with more aggressive probes, others say do nothing. So meanwhile, Chris and his father talk, and we get the sense that this is goodbye. You know, Chris will be gone for so long on this mission that his parents will be dead by the time they come back. Chris and Burton talk. Chris notes that he must decide whether to shut the whole project down or move forward more aggressively, bombarding the ocean with high intensity beams. Burton begs him not to do that. Why not? Would you destroy that which you can't understand? I don't advocate knowledge at any price. Knowledge is valid when it rests on morality, he says. The woman, who we realize is Chris's mother, watches more of the video, and they talk about the idea that Solaris is, the ocean on Solaris is kind of like a brain, a thinking substance. They introduce the 3 men who are working on the spaceship, and note that there could be a crew of 85 people, but there's only 3 of them, Dr. Snaut, Sotorius, and Gabarian, I think. So meanwhile, Burton, who has left at this point, he's kind of annoyed. He phones in to the father, and he says that there's something he didn't tell Chris. The man who died in the ocean of Solaris, Burton went to visit his widow and his son, and the son was the spitting image of the child that he saw on Solaris. Burton suggests not telling Chris right away, but we see that Chris is in the background, and he's already hearing this. So here's one of the interesting moments. Now we see Burton driving in his car. And this is a long, long driving sequence. This is like almost 5 minutes of driving. And I don't quite know how to take it. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things going on. I think it might be a taxi that's maybe driving itself. I don't think there's a driver in there, unless I'm wrong.
It didn't appear. I think that was maybe them trying to make it look futuristic because it was supposed to be a future city. What I think happened was he had requested, Tarkovsky had requested money to shoot in Tokyo because they had a more advanced looking city, but he didn't know what to shoot there. So that's why he had all that driving footage there. Okay. I remember hearing that story when I first saw this movie a long time ago. I haven't seen anything to confirm that when I did my research for this viewing, for this review, but that's the original story I had heard. That's the reason why all the long driving footage is in there, because he had to justify the cost of shooting there and taking the crew there, is that he had to have Tokyo footage. I think.
Interesting.
But either way, the goal was to show a futuristic city. So
yes, maybe
looking like someone wasn't behind the car, the wide shots of the electronic billboards and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that could be part of it. The other interesting thing is that he's got a child with him, and he has the child at the house earlier, but now the child is in the taxi with him. The child is in the back seat, and he's in the front seat. And he wouldn't have to be, because he's not driving the car. So it's kind of a curious thing. Why isn't he in the back seat with the child? And the child seems to want to connect with him, seems to be leaning forward, and he's just kind of staying in the front seat. And I don't know how to take it all. I'm not quite sure what that all means exactly.
I think that was supposed to show distance between him and the child. I think that was
Yeah,
more for it was, you're right, practically he should be next to the child, but I think Tarkovsky was trying to say something with how emotionally empty he is
yeah,
from everything he's experienced. Seeing a manifestation of that same child, the child's not his. How does he
yes,
react to that child? The emotional thing he just went through with his former best friend, because he's like, all friendships have to come to an end. I guess this is the end.
yes,
So I think it was more so uh, physically showing what the character is feeling type thing.
yeah. Yeah, I think you could be right. And I did wonder if there's a connection there with the child of the man who died, who he may have seen the manifestation of. Is this child in the back seat somehow connected in some way? I'm not 100% sure, but it's certainly a long, long sequence. We have 5 minutes to kind of consider this and try and figure out what Tarkovsky's getting at there.
Another version of that too is that Tarkovsky didn't like that quick transition of
Hmm.
the bone to the spacecraft.
Oh, yes.
So longer transitions was implemented in this film, and that was one of the longer transitions in the film.
Yeah. And I did also wonder if it was in some way trying to stand in for the fact that Chris is going on this long journey. And now here's this guy in the car going on a long, long journey in the car, which can't really compare to the journey that Chris is going to take. But I don't know. It's an interesting moment, to say the least. Um, so then we go back to the lake in the wilderness, and we see Chris burning up some old papers that he won't need anymore. And we see a photo of a woman for the second time. We actually see that photo earlier, and we see it again here. And there's a little bit of more stuff with his parents, and this really is goodbye, right? They're not going to see him anymore. So it's hard to even fathom that. I'm going to go on a space trip, and that's it. You're not going to see me. And they never tell us how long that trip is, but I'm guessing it could be years. If deep space travel, he could be gone a long, long time.
Yeah, this kind of wraps up the. Did you have any more thoughts on the first 45 minutes before we hit to space? Because I wanted to.
Nope,
Okay.
we're good.
Yeah, I want to just interject some thoughts on the first 45 minutes. I love the way he told the story here.
Hmm.
How long were they on there? How does he tell us? The guy has hair in the video, and he's bald in the room watching the video. How do we know that that kid is not his? Well, he says that he saw the manifestation. He doesn't flat out says it's not his kid. We initially thought it was his kid. So I like the way we have assumptions, and then things are changed on us through the course of just things happening, not characters flat out telling us things. So the way he tells the story in his 45 minutes, the way he handles the kid, the way he handles the fact that, you're right, they implied that his parents are going to be dead by the time he comes back, which is telling us indirectly he's going to be up there for years, or the character may die up there. But it's letting us know there's going to be some fatality or something drastic that's going to be happening where he's not going to be coming back, or if he comes back, they're not going to be there.
Yes. Obviously, I can't go into as much detail on the rest of this movie as I did into the first 45 minutes, but there's something about those first 45 minutes that just feels really important to me. It feels really interesting. And
well, it completely sets up the end.
Yeah, exactly.
The importance of how he feels about home, coming back to home, his father, and the fact that he thought he was never going to see his father again. So it kind of brings more weight to that ending and why it matters to him so much.
Yes, exactly. And it just Tarkovsky felt so strongly about having it there, even though it's outside of the novel, perhaps, but it's very important in the world of this movie. So
imagine if visually all we saw was the corridors of that space station.
yes,
Yeah.
I
First
might
of all,
not be.
we wouldn't have anything to contrast it with, and visually, it's
True.
so ugly for someone, a filmmaker known for the beauty of his cinematography and his landscapes.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to say I may not call it a beautiful movie if that's all we saw. I don't know. But anyway, I guess getting back into the movie, Chris arrives at the space station, and now I should just point out that the trip that he takes to the space station is much shorter than that car ride. It's like not even 2 minutes, I don't think. So, even though it probably took 2 years or something, we're not sure how long it took. It's just, it almost isn't there. We just kind of see images of outer space, and we hear a couple of voices, and then he's kind of there.
I think that may be a budget thing. So maybe the car ride was a surrogate for the space ride. Because the first few minutes of, not the first few minutes, maybe the first 15, 20 minutes of him on the space station really highlights the budget limitations. One, like you said, the trip there, and two, when he jettisons someone on a...
Yes.
Yeah, there are a couple parts here that shows the limitations of the budget, and I think that was one of them.
Yeah, true enough. So he arrives, and there's no one there to greet him, and it kind of feels like an abandoned ship. It's and I mean, there certainly have been lots of stories like that where, something happened to the crew of a ship, and we're going to go find out what happened. Everybody's gone, everybody's dead. So this could be an early version of that kind of story. But from this moment is where the movie really starts to get more gripping to me. Like, this is where I start to get into it, because this is intriguing. Arriving on the space station, nobody there. So he goes looking for a Dr. Snaut. He catches a glimpse of somebody in a white coat, and then there's a ball that rolls down the corridor toward him, which right away just makes me think of horror films, because there are horror films where something like that happens, where a ghost throws a ball and the ball comes, down
I think that
stairs.
happened in The Changeling, and it definitely happened in The Shining.
Yes. And so right away it's like, ooh, this is creepy. There's something creepy going on here, which is good. And then Snaut appears, and he seems kind of nervous and strange, and he tells Chris that Sartorius is in his quarters, and that Jabarian is dead. Jabarian, or Gibarian, however you pronounce it, he's actually someone Chris knows. He's like a friend of Chris's, and he's dead, committed suicide, apparently. And Chris does not believe that. He just does not see how that could be possible. That's not the man he knows. But Snaut refers to mysterious disorders that they've all been experiencing. And it's all very cryptic. We don't quite know what he's talking about. And then he kind of tells Chris to go rest up. Come back in an hour. We can talk more. Come back in an hour. But Chris wants to see Sartorius. No, he's in his lab. He can't be disturbed. Chris tries to reason with Snaut, and as he's doing this, I think it's a hammock in behind him suddenly moves ever so slightly, and again, very creepy. Because as far as we know, nobody else is here, and this Dr. Sartorius is somewhere else in a lab, but something has moved back here, some other person or thing. And before Chris can even investigate it, Snaut kind of ushers him out of the room, and he says, come back in an hour. No, maybe this evening, or no, tonight. You know what? Make it tomorrow. Come back tomorrow. And so he keeps on kind of pushing it off further and further. which to me would be huge warning bells, that something's wrong here. Like this guy's clearly not wanting to talk about it. And who's to say if you do come back tomorrow, he's going to not just say, no, I'll come back in another day or two. But anyway, he closes the door, and oh no, before he closes the door, he warns him to beware of things that he may see. And Chris says, hallucinations? And he says, no, just remember that we're not on Earth. And then he sort of closes the door. And at this point, I'm hooked. I'm just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And there's almost 2 hours left of this movie. Like this has been quite a bit. We've seen quite a bit, but there's 2 hours left to go. And it just kind of gets more and more gripping and fascinating as it goes along from here. He chooses a room, and then he goes to his dead friend's room, and he finds a note left for him, and he plays back a video file, and his friend is trying to warn him about what happened to him, and he says, it can happen to you, it can happen to others, really anyone. Don't think I've gone mad. I'm perfectly sane, and I'm going to tell you what happened so that if it happens to you, you don't think you're going mad. And he also says that he agrees with Sartorius, or whatever his name is. He thinks that we should bombard the ocean with high-intensity X-rays. I know it's forbidden, but, we should do this. It's the only way we're going to get through to this monster. So he actually uses the word monster. But before he can finish whatever he's going to say, Chris sees somebody out in the hall, and he winds up actually grabbing a gun, and he goes out into the hall looking to see what's what. And he winds up going to see Sartorius, who, he says, open the door or I'll break it down. And Sartorius says, okay, but don't come in. I'll come out. And then there's another really freaky moment that occurs here where after they've been talking for a while, somebody or something is pounding on the inside of that door, and the door opens and a little person comes out. Not to use any inappropriate terms, but a little person, someone who might be called a midget perhaps in some circles, comes running out, and Sartorius has to wrestle with him, get him back in the room, and then he sort of goes back inside and dismisses Chris and closes the door. So much like the hammock moving in the background, this is a little more serious now. We've seen a little person come running out of this room, and of course there's not supposed to be anybody else on the ship. And I do wonder, this seeing a little person, this is kind of like a weird film code for, this is weird, this is surreal. Like people like David Lynch have kind of used that, and I think other people have kind of, for some reason, that's become a bit of a code. If you show a little person, it's like we're now in some kind of alternate reality. I don't know if that would have been what Tarkovsky was thinking exactly, but
yeah, obviously we're in different times, so politically it's not correct even to imply that.
yeah,
But I think if there was a better budget, it would have just shown a smaller person instead of a little person. It would have just shown a person who looks shrunken down instead of someone suffering from dwarfism. And I think that was the intention. This is just Solaris made someone, but they didn't make them fully correct, kind of like Alien 2, where it's like, kill me.
Yeah.
It's just like a deformed version of Ripley. I think that was supposed to be like a version of someone who didn't come out quite correct. They came out smaller.
Oh, yeah.
I think.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Well, that's a good theory. I mean, I just thought, okay, what kind of weird thing does Sartorius have going on in his mind that this is what was created? But, maybe he just happens to know someone who's a little person, in his life. And so now this little person was manifested. I don't know.
But like you said,
But
it would have been, it's kind of code for more than just coincidentally a little person.
yeah, yeah, I think it is. Yeah. So then at this point, a woman walks past while Chris is really kind of distracted, and he kind of sees her disappear around the corner, and he tries to follow, but she kind of keeps ahead of him, and it seems like she kind of leads him to his dead friend's body, which is kind of in a deep freeze. Um, so that's interesting. So then he goes back to see Snout again. And he asks him, "Is there anyone else here? Like, what's going on?" And he sort of talks about this woman, and is she real? And Snout seems to get kind of angry and defensive. And Chris says, "Look, I don't think you're insane." And Snout says, "Insane would be a blessing," which I think is a great line. Chris goes back and listens more to his dead friend's recording. And the woman actually appears in the video that he's watching, and his friend kind of shoos her away. And then he says he's afraid of the others, they won't understand. And then we hear them trying to break into the room. It's not insanity, he says. It has something to do with conscience. I wish you'd come here sooner, Chris. And so once again here, he's kind of interrupted. It seems like every time somebody's maybe going to tell Chris what's going on, there's an interruption. So we don't actually get the full story out of them. So once again, there's an interruption. We don't get the full story. And I find that interesting that he says conscience. It's something to do with conscience, not consciousness, but conscience, like that implies guilt or things that may be haunting you from your past. It's like, it's more than just, I'm pulling a random thing out of your mind. It's like, it's out of your conscience. So whether or not that is exactly the intention, that's kind of what it's implying to me.
It definitely seemed like guilt, memories, the past, those are all strong themes.
Yes.
And one of the major things that have the author kind of disown this version of his project is he didn't really agree with the emphasis on those type of things.
Right. Yes. So finally, Chris lies down on a bed. He falls asleep. And he dreams of a woman, or does he? Maybe she's just sitting there. She's in the chair in his room, looking down at him. And at this point, we're about 73 minutes into the film here. So this is like, some movies will be over, like Doris Wishman would have been over 10 minutes ago, right? This is 73 minutes in, and where this woman materializes, and this is very important. Like, this is really where the rest of the movie is kind of beginning here. And in a way, the movie, again, it's just getting more.
A Doris Wishman movie would have thankfully been over.
That's true. So this woman who just seems to be there lies down on the bed with him, and he kind of sits up. He's kind of disturbed, and she gets up, and she's wearing this shawl, which she kind of lays down on a chair. And then she finds the picture of the woman that we saw earlier at Chris's parents' house, and apparently he brought it with him. He brought it on the trip. So she looks at this and she says, "Who's this?" And then she kind of looks in the mirror, and she sort of holds the picture up, and she goes, "Chris, it's me." So, and I think it is her. It is the woman from the picture. But she did not recognize herself. She had to see herself in the mirror. So it's almost like she didn't know, she didn't know who she was until she kind of, oh, well, yeah, that's me.
Mirrors and reflections are also a theme in this as well.
Okay, yes. She seems to be struggling to remember, to understand things. She seems like she's really kind of in a bit of a fog. He tries to leave, but she insists that, she can't be without him. And she mentions Dr. Snaut, which kind of throws him. It's like, how do you know about Dr. Snaut? It's kind of a weird thing. So she basically, he winds up saying, "You can come with me, but you'll need to put on a spacesuit." She needs to take off this dress that she's wearing, and she needs his help. And so he goes to help her, and he's untying these ties in the back of the dress. And I love this moment because he unties it, and it's like there's no way for the dress to open. It's like this dress looks absolutely real. It looks functional. It's like if somebody saw a photograph of it, they copied it to a T, but they didn't understand that the dress has to open. They didn't get that. There are these ties. And so he winds up having to use scissors to cut the dress off of her. So again, it's another clue that this is manufactured. She's a manufactured version because whoever made this photocopy of her didn't understand that the dress had to open.
I want to just explore this a little bit more before you move on.
Sure.
So when we broke down kind of the first section of this podcast, there was something I left out that we can definitely delve into now. She's a copy of a copy, which is why you kind of have that little person, because there are gaps in memories, and it's not the person, it's what you think of that person, and it's how Solaris interprets your thoughts of that person. So you lose things in translation with each step of the way. It's kind of like telephone. I'll whisper in your ear, you whisper in his ear, and by the time you get to the end, it's something completely different than what you started with. So whereas you have the little person, which again, something could have been lost in translation from what the actual person was to what the memories of that person was to how Solaris interpreted the memories of that person. Here you have something a lot more subtle, where it's just the dress. But I like that it's small thing, but the copy of the copy. And the dress is kind of interesting too, because the dress comes with the tear, and the tear she has a wound by that tear, which is where his first wife injected herself with chemicals and killed herself. So that scar and that tear is there from his memory, but obviously something minor like, the zipper or something is not there in his memory. So I found that interesting. And also following up with the copy of the copy theme, is that there will be another copy of her later, and that copy knows that she has to cut the dress to take it off. So it's a copy of a copy of a copy, and it's just funny, like what passes along, because now cutting, even though like having a buttons on a dress should be in his memory, what's fresher in his memory is cutting the dress. So that's what that copy, or that's what Solaris chooses to focus on, because it's the fresher thing. So I just found all that interesting. Something simple like that has like so much layers to it.
Yeah, me too. And that also, in a way, it reminded me of The Midwich Cuckoos, the novel by John Wyndham, which was made into Village of the Damned and Children of the Damned. There are a bunch of identical children, and the main character figures out that if you teach one of these children how to do something, then all of the other children know how to do it. It's like they have a collective consciousness. And so here, we're getting a bit ahead, but this is the first copy of her, and she had no idea how to get her dress off, so he cuts it off. So when the second copy comes back, it's like she's retained this, it's like she learned, I'm the second copy, I've retained everything I learned from the first copy. It's a little bit of that.
She retained it, or Solaris retained it.
Exactly.
And put it into her. Or he retained it, and Solaris pulled it from him, which is so interesting because any one of those things could be true. They're not all true, but any one of them could be true, but all of them can't be true. So that's another reason why this film is so fascinating and why it's studied so much.
Yes, absolutely. So it's all very creepy and weird and intriguing. And there's kind of a feeling of impending dread. You're not quite sure what's going to happen here. What's going on, and it's the kind of film. Like somebody once said that in novels, characters are developed. In short stories, characters are revealed. And a lot of movies operate more like short stories where they really reveal things to you pretty quickly. But this is a movie that's more like a novel in that it takes its time to develop things. And so, we don't even really know yet that this is his wife per se. Like it hasn't actually been said, but you're able to kind of piece together the clues that we've seen, the photograph and various things, and you kind of put it all together and go, oh, this is what's going on. Like it's not like the movie really kind of
It's not like the movie gives you a montage to show you what's going on.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't reveal things very quickly and simply to you. It's more like you've got to piece it together. It's creepy and everything, but there's that kind of odd, hopeful feeling of, oh gee, my dead wife is maybe alive again. She's here, like. But, I can't really trust that. That's kind of a weird thing. Like, how can she be here? There's something wrong with this. And so then this is interesting that around 79 minutes into this movie, we now get a card that says part 2. So that was all part 1 leading up to this moment. And now this is part 2. So this is the sequence that I think you referred to, kind of, that Chris very cleverly decides to get rid of his wife, or this copy of his wife, whoever this is, and he takes her to a little rocket ship or whatever, some escape pod or whatever it is, and he convinces her to get inside the rocket, and she says, "What about you?" And he says, "Oh yeah, I'll be in a minute," But then he closes the door and basically sends the rocket out into space with her in it. And this is the moment where perhaps you were suggesting the budget wasn't massive, because he's in the chamber with the rocket and there's fire, and I have to think that in reality probably the fire would have completely engulfed him,
disintegrated him instantly.
Yeah, he manages to just get a little bit singed, and it's an interesting moment. But I think, all of that aside, it's more about the desperation. Like he just decides, I'm going to fire this. I don't know who this woman is, but she can't possibly be my dead wife, so I'm firing her into outer space to get rid of her. And I found myself thinking, what if you need that rocket? Like, how many of these rockets do you have here? You've just wasted a rocket firing this person into outer space. But
where's your humanity? Someone's floating in space. You're like, man, we could have really used that rocket.
Exactly. Yes.
Here I am. For me, this is the most powerful moment. Laying aside the budgetary restraints that you really use your imagination in this scene. Putting that aside, for me, this is the most haunting moment in the movie, because I think about that poor replicate out there.
Yes.
Is it immortal? Like, because when we see later on they try to kill themselves, it's very difficult. They tend to resurrect a lot. So how long does she need oxygen? How long is she going to be floating around in space there, longing for him? Crying, desperate. Like, that could be an eternal being, an eternal longing. This is like, some like Greek tragedy. This thing just in space, like longing for him. Her for an eternity.
Well, maybe somebody needs to make an unauthorized sequel here, or an offshoot, which is all about her once she's sent off into space. It's like her adventures in that little escape pod. You could consider doing that, making that movie. What do you think?
Talk about budgetary restraints. If you thought that rocket ship taking off looked like it was a low budget, wait till you see my version of how low budget that's going to look.
Yeah. Don't you just get a big tin can and have her inside of it, and you don't
It's
show
like,
the other side?
why in the window of that rocket ship are cars driving by? And kids walking to school in space.
Yeah, wow. Well, something to think about anyway. That could be interesting. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I thought about that too, like what's going to happen to her now, And I
And I
think
like
that,
the fact that they didn't forget about it in the story. It is brought up later on in the dialogue
yeah,
that woman is floating in space somewhere.
yeah. Yes, and I guess we have to hope, but because I think they talk later about how the systems of these, whatever they are, these replicants, these copies, it's kind of
Others, are they
unstable.
called others, I think?
Maybe could be others, yeah.
Yeah.
They or visitors or something, yeah.
But yeah, visitors, maybe it's visitors.
Their systems are unstable, so they kind of have to stay close to Solaris, maybe to remain stable. So maybe if the rocket goes far enough, she'll just disintegrate, just cease to exist.
She'll turn into a little puddle.
Yeah,
Some
like
of the
that.
water from Solaris.
Yeah.
And that
Well,
puddle will land on another planet and form into some other thing.
It'll grow.
And it turned into the T2.
Exactly.
The liquids.
Yes, yeah,
Terminator.
exactly, yeah. Well, you're on to another unauthorized sequel now. There's two of them. So he gets rid of her, and then Snaut shows up and he congratulates Chris on having handled this situation really well, in spite of his, nearly incinerating himself. And he gives him the advice the next time, press the launch button from out in the hall. But he thinks, yeah, okay, you did good, you got rid of her. And then he kind of says, the visits began after we started experimenting with high intensity beams. And you're lucky that she was just someone from your past. What if you saw something out of the recesses of your soul? So I find that very interesting too. It kind of goes hand in hand with the conscience thing, something out of the recesses of your soul. So it could be not even a person that you used to know, but almost like a concept or something, like something deep within you, some kind of whatever, evil, guilt, I don't know what it would be, but something that would come out of you that would be terrible, right?
Another spinoff. Turn this into a horror movie,
Exactly.
What is that thing? It's the recesses of my soul.
I didn't know it was so, anyway.
Dark and
exactly.
Or it could be a horror comedy, like, all right, guys, don't think of anything. And then it's like, what did you think of? I just thought of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. It's like Ghostbusters.
That's right. Yes, and of course, one of the other movies I thought of in all of this was Forbidden Planet, where the idea is kind of that the minds or the consciousness of all the people somehow created the whatever it was, the evil force that was destroying them. It was like coming out of them somehow. So again, kind of similar to this idea that Solaris is somehow pulling stuff out of these people, and you're lucky that it wasn't out of the recesses of your soul. So then he says that the ocean responded to our probe with one of its own and extracted memories. So here we are getting the explanation finally as to what's going on. And Chris says, she won't come back. And Snaut says, she will, and she won't. Which I think is another great line, because she comes back, but it's not the same one, right? Number one is off there in space, as you said. And number two, which is identical in every way, and maybe even has the memories of number one, is now here.
Well, I think if she did, she'd be a little bit more,
She'd be angry.
Yeah. I don't know if she'd be as loving if she had some of those memories.
Yeah, could be. could be. So then Chris talks about, sort of scrapping the space station, and will Snout sign his report? And Snout says, but what if this is the long-awaited contact? Which I think is kind of perhaps going back to the themes of the original novel, is the communication between different races. But interesting, though, that we could shut this down, but wait a minute, what if we've really made some important contact here? So of course, the wife returns, and she has the same dress on and the same shawl, which she winds up taking off and putting on the chair, and you could see the old one is still there, which is kind of freaky in itself, right? It's like,
he's lucky she didn't see the old one there.
Yeah, exactly. So proof that she's another identical copy, in a sense. And then she uses the scissors, as you said. It's all very creepy. And her name is Hari. And so he does actually say that this is my wife. Like, we kind of figured it out, but and then this time he seems to be more open to it all, and she kind of gets into bed with him, and they embrace, and he might just be accepting it now that, okay, this is a thing. And I mean, it's kind of like, what I was saying. It's like, in a way, if she's there, she's a copy. She's got identical thoughts and feelings. Like, at what point is it not okay to just say, okay, well, this is my wife. She's here. She might have been created out of some artificial means, but I can't tell the difference, really. Like, it's kind of
Yeah, but also it's his version of his wife.
Yes.
How he envisions her, not how she doesn't have her own agency. She doesn't have her own independent thoughts. That's why it's so connected to her. It's not a three-dimensional person, it's just the side that she showed him. So there's a side that you show the person you're with, which is a small percentage of you. And then of that small percentage, there's even a smaller percentage that they choose to focus on and view you through that lens. Mm-hmm. So it's a very small percentage of her that's there, but it's his wife, but it's not his wife, So not all of her.
That's true. And actually, Snout said that to him in the previous scene, that you saw the materialization of your conception of her. So an interesting way to put it. And so it seems like he's kind of accepting it now, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to fire her out into outer space again. I'm not going to try to destroy her. I'll just accept that she's here and embrace her and whatever. And so the next morning he tries to leave the room, and she's still in the room. And you made reference to this, that she actually breaks the door down. She basically breaks right through the door, tears it apart, and she winds up getting injured in the process. She's cut, she's bleeding, she's severely damaged. So he goes to get something to deal with this, and then when he turns around, she's practically already healed. So she's healing very rapidly, and we do learn as we go forward that this is something that they seem to do. They seem to regenerate, and even if you take some blood from them and you try to destroy the blood, you try to burn it up or something, it still regenerates itself. So it's can you destroy them? As you were saying, when she's out there in outer space, is there a way that she will be destroyed, or will she just exist forever? Is it immortality? Is it a curse? You're doomed to be alive forever
in a spaceship, screaming for your husband.
Exactly. So yeah, so
Why
he
did you create me to suffer? It's the question of man. Isn't that something that one of the quotes from Jesus on the cross? Something
oh,
like
could be,
that. Yeah,
could
something
be.
about, you know, Father, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
sounds
I
right.
think
Yeah.
I think that's one of the quotes from Jesus. Yeah, Father, why have you
Yes.
forsaken me? It's like,
Yes.
Chris, why have you forsaken me? Like, why did you create me just to suffer? You know?
Yes, indeed. Yes. So so yeah, so he I guess he gets a call from one of the others, and he winds up going to meet with them, and of course he has to bring uh, Hari, or his wife, with him because she can't be alone, and so he introduces her to the others, and yeah, it's interesting. The one guy is a little bit friendly, the other guy is not so friendly, and he's not so interested in kind of pretending that this is a person. You know, he seems to be kind of more negative about it, and he says, do a blood test, and that will be sobering for you to see that, And then he talks about doing an autopsy. Are you qualified to do an autopsy? And Chris says, "Hey, that's my wife. I've told you that's my wife. And if you try to hurt her, I will kill you," or whatever he says. So
And you have to
it's
question
interesting.
how long they've been there and how many times have they been through scenarios like that?
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think this is the case by any indication, but it almost drops a tiny seed of doubt in your mind. Is that really Chris? Is that just a copy? He's like, oh God, I got to talk to this
Yeah.
copy of a copy now. Like, how many times do I have to go through this?
Yeah,
So,
well, that's an interesting possibility, but I also think it's interesting how quickly Chris has kind of adopted her. Like he fired her into outer space
mhm,
just like hours ago. Really, it's maybe yesterday. It's not that long ago,
mhm.
and now he's like defending her. It's my wife. Stop talking about that. So he seems fully indoctrinated into this situation,
Yeah.
and the
It
other
reminds me
guys.
of a Twilight Zone episode, not to go on a tangent here, but are you a fan of the Twilight Zone?
I am. Yes. Yes.
There was this Twilight Zone episode. It was around the time where they were trying to save money, so it was shot on video. So it's one of
Mm.
those rare Twilight Zone episodes shot on video. Um, and it was a family, a mother, well, two parents and a daughter, and they had robot servants. And the daughter says, I don't, we should destroy these robot servants. They're not human. Like, let's just destroy all the robots. And then it came to a realization that she was a robot.
Oh
And
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it
Yeah.
kind of reminds me of that in a way where like Chris is like, no, they're human. And it's like, no, what, Chris, you are not
Yeah.
human, Chris.
Yeah. Well, it also goes back to Blade Runner again too, because people
Yeah.
have theorized in Blade Runner that the main character may in
Harrison
fact
Ford,
not be.
yeah, not be
Yeah.
human. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm not sure what the truth is there, but it's definitely a possibility, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So um, yeah, so it's all very interesting, and
A lot of heavy
it's
concepts.
yes, yes, and he winds up showing her the home movie, I guess. He actually mentioned it to his parents before he left. He said, "Don't look for that film. I'm going to take that with me. Something about going camping or something. Film about camping." And so I guess that's what this is, because he suddenly is screening this old movie for her, and she sort of it's an interesting moment because she claims to remember things about this, even though he says, "Oh, this happened before I ever met you," and she says, "No, no, no, I met her, that woman in a video, and she didn't like me. She told me to get lost, and so I'm presuming that that's actually true, that she is remembering meeting Chris's mother, and that Chris's mother didn't like her." And Chris was trying to kind of protect her from that and say, "Oh, no, 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 this is all from before," but she's kind of getting around him and remembering things that maybe he doesn't want her to remember. So I found that all very interesting. And then she asked questions too about, you know, why did you yes, oh, you left town, and you know, why didn't you take me with you? And he says, well, you refused to come. And then she says, oh yeah, I remember that now. You know, so it's kind of like she's becoming more and more. She's gaining more memories. She's gaining more knowledge, and becoming more human in a sense as she goes forward here. So then I think the next thing is that one of the other doctors suggests that they need to, I guess they talk about the fact that sleep, you know, their sleep is interrupted. These visitors come during sleep, and they must maybe transmit their waking thoughts to Solaris to try and deal with this problem of visitors always coming in the night and disrupting their sleep. And the theory being that they would transmit Chris's waking thoughts, and he maybe doesn't think that's a good idea. But then Snaut says that Sartorius has ways, he's working on a system to destroy the system, the very particular system that these visitors operate on, their nervous systems. He has a way of destroying that. And so it could be a bit of a threat that he could destroy Hari if Chris doesn't cooperate with this theory. And Snaut, as this is going on, they're talking, he realizes that Hari is sleeping in the bed, and Snaut is shocked to learn that she has learned how to sleep. You know, like this is apparently new ground for the visitors, and so he comments that this won't end well. And Chris does wander off, and then he rushes back to make sure that she's okay, and she is. And the next night, I believe, Hari is awake. Chris wakes up and discovers her awake. She's kind of upset, and she says, "You don't love me, and I don't know where I came from. You know, I'm not Hari. You know, she took poison. I'm someone else. Sartorius told me." And she's kind of wanting Chris to tell her the truth, I guess, of who she is, where she came from, and so he does tell her about the whole suicide of his wife and how that went down, with her injecting herself in the arm. And Hari, of course, recognizes that she has that injection wound, and she asks, why did she do it? I guess she felt I didn't love her. But I love you, Hari says. And she winds up going to sleep. And the next day, there's a big birthday party in the library for Snaut. But he's an hour late, and he comes in and he's all kind of disheveled, and he seems out of sorts, and he talks about sleep and how they need sleep, and he also talks about this idea that they don't really want to be conquering new worlds. This isn't really what people want. They just want Earth to kind of extend itself into other worlds. They want a mirror. You know, what you said before about mirrors being important. You know, Earth doesn't want to find a new and different place. They just want a mirror, you know.
Mirrors and reflections, yeah.
Yeah. And Sartorius kind of tears into Chris at one point and says, what are you doing here? You know, other than having a tryst with your ex, you know, what are you doing here? And Hari actually winds up defending Chris and saying, you know, in these inhuman conditions, he is the most human. You know, you talk about these visitors as if they are irritations, but they are a part of you, your conscience. And Chris loves me, well, maybe not me exactly, but he needs the living me. And then Sartorius tears into her and says, "You're not human. You're just a copy, a matrix." And she actually starts crying and says, "Maybe I am, but I am becoming human. I can feel as deeply as you. I can live without him now. I am a human being. You are cruel." And Chris actually winds up kneeling sort of before her, I guess, asking forgiveness. And this just makes Sartorius angry. And when he says, "Stand up," like he doesn't want her being treated like a human. And I think, again, this is where we get into this whole thing of, what makes a human being human, and she has feelings. She looks human, she's like, who can say that she isn't deserving of the same consideration as any other human being,
Yeah, it's so interesting with her character and her mortality and her quest to become human. In that Snout says, "Uh-oh, she's assimilating, she's becoming more human. This is trouble." But then they also say that she's not human, and she says she defends her humanity, but then she also tries to kill herself several times. And the more that she is around, the more independent she is, the more she becomes human, but then the more she tries to destroy herself. So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting, like why does Snout fear her becoming more human as being a bad thing? And as she becomes more human, the more she wants to destroy herself. In the book, it was because if she didn't destroy herself, Chris would never go back to Earth. And here it's a little bit more vague because I'm not sure. Like, do you have clarity on the movie version of like why, as she becomes more human, she wants to die?
No, not exactly. I think maybe that, even though she feels she's becoming more human, she kind of knows she isn't, or she can't last. Maybe like if they try to leave the orbit of Solaris, she probably wouldn't survive. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
It could be the same thing as the book too, but it wasn't clear in the movie that she wanted to die because he wouldn't leave if she was alive. Can it's the same thing in the movie, but I don't think the movie was as clear as the book.
No, it's more ambiguous. Well, I haven't read the book, but I can.
I haven't read it either, but from the synopsis.
Yeah. I suspect it is more ambiguous, and we are probably dealing with more human emotion and human drama probably than are in the book. So, yeah, it's complicated, and this is another example here where Chris and Snaut wander off and they leave her alone in the library, and then you referred to this earlier that he comes rushing back, thinking that she's going to have died or been in great distress or something, but she's totally fine. As she said in the scene, she can now exist outside of his orbit, I suppose. So she is becoming more human, more real. And so it's we just kind of continue on with more of this human drama and relationship, and I'm not sure how much to go into more detail about it, but it's it's I find it a very moving and effective story. I don't know. What do you think?
Things get kind of more symbolic, more abstract. Once they have that philosophical scene that lasts a few minutes where the characters give their stance on how they feel about things, it's a lot of non-dialogue scenes just showing you a lot of visuals. She tries to kill herself a few times. She successfully does it off screen. Chris has this dream. I believe it's a dream sequence because a lot of it's not real. I doubt like there was a replicant of his mother there, but there's this sequence of his mother in the room, Hari in the room, his dog in his room, and it felt kind of reminiscent of a different version of the end of 2001,
Hmm.
where the lead character's in the room being examined by the aliens, and he's evolving, he's aging, time is passing as he's in this room, and he eventually becomes the sun god and goes back to Earth as Superman.
Right.
But this feels like a similar type scene where time is passing by. It's not passing by at the speed as it did in 2001, but there's a long period of time where he's sick and he's either having dreams or hallucinations. And during this period of time where he thinks he's talking to his mother, and he's seeing all these different imageries, by the time he starts to get better, that's when Snout tells him, like, yeah, while you were sick, we destroyed her. This is what she wanted. She wanted to die. Here's a note she left for you. And then after that, he explains that islands are starting to appear on Solaris. And then eventually we have the discussion of, are they going to stay, go, what are they going to do? And then we eventually see that Chris is on one of these islands, and we know it's an island because it's raining indoors, and the father doesn't acknowledge it. And then eventually we do pull out, and there's less ambiguity on if it's an island or not. I think it would have kind of been interesting if it just rained indoors and it was up to us to decide if he was on an island or not, but it pulls out and takes that mystery out of it that he's on the island. So now the only mystery, was he on the island the whole time? Is he a
Right.
manifestation of Solaris? Like, did he die when he sent the first Hari into space? Maybe he didn't just singe his jacket and get a burnt mark on his face. Maybe he disintegrated like he should logically, maybe that's when he died,
Yes.
and he was manifested afterwards. So there are some interesting, questions that come up with all of the themes that were developed through the 2 hours and 45 minutes of the film. And yeah, I thought
Yes.
the ending was well earned. There are lots of
Yes.
movies that just try to have these epic moments, but they're not well earned. All of these moments at the end were just completely well earned. You don't have such a that ending isn't great if we don't spend all that time on Earth and with his father and on that
Mhm.
farm, or woodside house, wherever they were.
Yeah.
we don't,
Yeah.
we don't, we don't feel the same impact if we didn't spend that time on Earth. So yeah, this was just a great film, a great meditation. um and I highly recommend it. I highly recommend doing some research, or maybe just even watching this podcast is enough research to understand what Tarkovsky tries to accomplish in the film, because then you can really appreciate it. And then it's just not like, oh God, how long is this guy going to be driving? Like, why is this guy moping in the woods so long? Like, what is he looking at? What is he thinking? You won't have these questions as much if you understand, like, it's all leading up to something, and it's all building, and it's all fragments of time that we're taking from this character, that shows us his mind state. And we can't appreciate where he's at if we don't know where he's been.
Yeah. And I think going back again to the first 45 minutes, part of what makes that so interesting is, all the shots of the water and the plant life in the water that almost seems to be waving or communicating with him in a way. And then at the end of the movie, where you reveal that he's on an island on Solaris, it kind of makes you think, well, was he already there at the beginning with all that water? Was that Solaris communicating with him, or is that just kind of foreshadowing? It's hard to say, but
Or
it
contrasting, or
yeah, yeah. I
a
mean, it
lot of
just
things it could
makes
be.
it just makes it more interesting, and yeah, I found it a very moving experience watching this film, and even though it is 2 hours and 45 minutes, in a way, I think the longest part was the first 45 minutes or so, and then it starts to really, to me, just becomes more and more gripping as it goes along. And what's going to happen. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know, like the question again about why does she destroy herself? I mean, part of me wondered, if is it tied into the fact that he's sick, he's not doing well? Like, does she feel that it's somehow destroying him as she becomes more human, and the only way to save him is for her to go away? I'm not sure, but that's something that did occur to me as I was watching it.
Yeah, yeah. I'd also be interested to know like what the experience would be watching this film a third time. The first time I knew I enjoyed it because I knew I was watching something great, but I didn't really appreciate it. And there were parts where I just was like, why is this taking so long? Why is this so paced? And my patience was waning. Here I kind of appreciated it more, but the first 45 minutes still dragged to me. Now with all of this context, like I wonder like how I feel about that first 45 minutes the next time I watch it. Which is 2 hours and 45 minutes. It's not going to be tomorrow, but I will watch it again, and I'll be interested to know like how I react to that first part of the movie, knowing how important it is to the rest of the movie, and knowing the questions I still have in my mind. Am I going to be seeking answers, more answers? Am I going to be at a different point in my life where I'm going to reinterpret these things in different ways, because of where I'm at in my life, so that's what art makes you do, and this is art, and this is a perfect movie.
I agree.
Ironically, it's his least favorite movie as well, Tarkovsky. But
is it?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think it's great, and I suspect it would only get better the more times you watch it. I think there's more detail probably that you would recognize and go, hey, wait a minute, that relates to that, and I suspect it just becomes better and better. I feel like it's such a dense movie. There's a lot in there. And I think more watches are probably just going to make it better.